downtown Baltimore.
Wow, look at that restaurant. That'd be good.
Crafty Crab.
Seafood
And we are headed to Fort McHenry to go see. Is that like steam coming out of there? Where Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. But this is downtown Baltimore. I've never been here. I've never been to Maryland. So this is our first time. Looks like
There's steam coming out of the ground everywhere.
yeah.
I guess it's
There looks like some old either church or something there in the distance with the clock tower. And it's a rainy day. All right, I guess we just go in right here, Fort McHenry National Monument and Historical Shrine.
I wonder if that's it over there.
So you walk into the visitor center, and then you watch a free video here. You have to pay to go into the fort, but we're gonna see what actually some of this is. But it just kind of, I think it tells about the song and the War of 1812.
Say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Powerful words from our national anthem. They speak to our American identity.
River by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 2004.
Wow. It was dredged from the river in 2004. And it weighed 200 and, no, how much does it weigh? 34 pounds? 34
36
pounds.
pounds.
36 pounds. That's cool that they found that. 1812 to 1815. We're walking on over here to the fort, and it's raining. I've got my umbrella, but we're gonna walk on over here and see. The flag is at half-mast today, whole weekend, and since Queen Elizabeth passed away last Friday or Thursday. Bomb shelter?
Like further bombs and their powder and
Uh-huh.
ammunition and stuff.
What about that door? Thick. Old the ceiling is.
Ancient track Baltimore. It says, keep them from joining the Confederacy. That was bad.
I wonder why it slopes like that.
I don't know. Maybe I like this. Maybe that acid reflux.
Yeah, throw you in the jail. Three cells. Go in there. Tiny, tiny peephole to see out of. Walking up a little path up out of here, and I guess that's where they can see into the harbor.
There to kind of look like what it looked like when they
right down from the harbor. It's a rainy day, but you know that day it shows the battle. It was raining that day. So this just makes it more realistic. It was in April, so I'm sure that it was cold. If you stayed in this room, you were an eyewitness to the chaos. They have such wide doors. This is so wide. I mean, the regular door is like, you know, from there to there. This is really wide.
Yeah. Boy, these have been preserved good, haven't they?
Yeah, those aren't. Look how they have the where it holds their guns at the end of the deal. They grab them as they get up.
They even had sprinkler systems in there. Back in the day. Wow.
Yeah, they were ahead of their time, huh?
Yeah.
The original crossbar right here too.
Pig bones from 1840.
What's a pig bone?
Pigs.
Oh, pig.
Yeah.
Pig. Pieces of china, saucer, a hammerhead,
He lives in Sunset.
Iron pike blade with ring, a mini ball, horseshoe. That's neat, all of this stuff. Oh, look, a clothespin. A medicine bottle. Oh, a button. A daily ration, 1814 soldiers' rations included beef, salt, pork, bread, liquor. Indigestion was not uncommon. $203 buttons have been recovered from a field dig. captain's quarters. Had to make their own food. Their own expense.
Man, you should have seen the restrooms they had back there. Oh, baby, back back. Ooh, there's eating oysters, see ya?
Yeah, high in the hall, but look, they had to purchase all of their food, purchase their own food at their own expense.
Did you see that one go back there?
Say that again.
So you got the junior officers' quarters here, right? The commander's office over there.
Okay.
2 rooms of barracks, 2 buildings worth of barracks for enlisted and non-commissioned officers over here. But then the junior officer, below the George Armistead, commander of the fort, start of the war or during the fight. But inside, you've got a gentleman sitting in the corner over there, dressed. The majority of people here are United States Corps of Artillery, so that's what the captain, dressed up as a captain of the Corps of Artillery in the back. Guy with his back toward us, dressed like Maryland militia. Now we've got attention. And then coming down the walkway over here, you've got the man in charge of the show. So just like the major, just show by the 2 epaulets right on either shoulder.
So you're the big wig.
Wearing the uniform of the commanding officer.
And they're in here, I'm sure, planning the next phase of the battle.
Absolutely. Actually, we're talking about cannon manufacturing processes. So we have artillery here that we actually fire. And it's difficult, apparently, for the federal government currently to procure, because they don't have a system in place necessarily, to procure firing artillery. And so we have the 3 big guns. There's 4 on the deck, on the gun deck. 2 of them are reproduction fireable cannons, and then one's an original that is not fired, and the other's fiberglass. And we used to fire up until 2014 the large 18-pounder and 24-pounder. So that's they fire round ball, so that's the weight of the round ball of iron. It's about, I don't know, 8 inches for the probably 6 to 8 inches for the 18-pounder, and then a little bit big for the 24. So we fired all of them up until the bicentennial in 2014, where one of them failed. And so we were just discussing the investigation that followed to determine why it failed and what can be done about it. And so the investigation, I think, concluded in 2015 and found that it was manufacturer defect on artillery. So that all of the large cannons were immediately retired. So, but we do have a field piece out there, which is a smaller 6-pounder. It's on a limber, transported by either horse or men if it's in short distances. They have these leather straps and ropes with hooks called recols that they hook on the various places on the artillery piece, and then they move it around the field. And so we were out firing that yesterday. So we're planning on firing it today at 2, but the weather has curtailed that. So we're kind of stuck indoors. So we had this is the bicentennial. This is not bicentennial. This is the anniversary of the Battle of Baltimore. September 14th was the battle, and so we get the weekend closest to that in September. And so yesterday was the big day. So parade Friday, fireworks last night, and large numbers of troops on the field, artillery, musket firing. And then today we try to do some of the same, but with less personnel. But the rain has stopped all of that. And so we're inside just talking with people and taking it easy after a day of a long day yesterday.
Yeah. Which, they said 2 of these were original. Which, do you know?
2 of what?
2 of the barracks were.
No, all the ground floors are original. This building you're in was the most renovated over the last 200 years, but it's still mostly the ground floors are mostly original. As the fort originally stood in 1814, there were no second floors to these buildings, and then there was no south fort. There was a little ramp across to the Ravelin, which is that triangle-shaped piece of earthworks just out in front of the ramp. And so you didn't have, it was more of a low-profile fort. You didn't have these huge cannon that are there now. Most of the artillery then was out, whereas where the four are out now, there were about 30 on 2 levels out there facing where the enemy would approach. And so the porches, you didn't have the porches, and so it was a lot more simpler. But the needs of the Army between 1814 and 1860s changed, and so it was always difficult to combat poor health of the garrison here forever. Drainage is still a problem in some cases. They made great advances in the 20th century with the pipes, but and so and then the swampy ground. There was no seawall, and so quality of the water, etc. And so the renovations occurred in order to, we believe, to capture some of the breezes. So you get the second floors. Plus, with the larger guns, it required more personnel, more soldiers, more artillerymen. And so you needed to increase the size inside the fort of the barracks. So the 2 buildings across the parade were the enlisted men's barracks, and there's 3 rooms on each floor, fireplace at the ends. And then this building was for the junior officers, so you have a captain probably staying in this room, and then 2 lieutenants staying in one of the other rooms, and then the third may be a common area or eating place. And then on the other side of this magazine, which was had since been enlarged today, it was much smaller. You had the commander officer's quarters, which was in fact 2 buildings. So that far right door was an alleyway. They've since connected it. It's all one building now. And so the commander, and so it was a single company of artillery. So less than 100 men with a captain and a couple lieutenants and non-commissioned officers. But you also had, because it was a fort, you had a commanding, the post commander, which in this case was a Major Armistead from the famous battle. And so he lived in that building. And so, and then his kitchen, I believe his kitchen was what that extra extended building was there. But by the 1830s and 40s, they have completed most of the renovations. The Sally Port was installed, and then it again expanded because the needs of the post. So they have some on the left-hand side storage, and on the right is they put in, after the Sally Port was built, they again renovated and put in some prison cells for
We've seen that.
To temporarily hold individuals, probably mostly military folks that try to sneak out or some military violation. So it's and then it's let's see what else. So that's about it. There's no evidence of the original bombardment. There's no damage evident in that, but much of the walls are original. Even if the facings of the bricks had been repaired or replaced, the interior is still there.
How many do you think was here in the original battle per se, or right inside?
So there was a better part of over 1,000 defenders, and so there were 2 key points for the British to attack Baltimore. One was by land, which they came up the North Point to the east side of the city near Patterson Park today, which is kind of the heights on the east side, and then here. I mean, this to the on the opposite side of the Sally Port here, where the river kind of goes on either side of the fort. Up to the right, it just kind of peters out. It doesn't go. At the time, you wouldn't get up into the city. You'd have to disembark and then march. But around to the left here, it goes up into where the inner harbor is today, which would be ideal if you could get past the fort. The depth of the channel in 1814 wasn't that great, and so the British aren't getting large ships of the line up this far. They're getting smaller vessels, and they were able to get specialized vessels up reasonably close to the fort, which were high-tech weapons of the day, which were rocket ships and bomb ships. So these were specially built especially the rocket ships, the smaller vessel, but they had along the hull on the sides tubes that extended up, so the rockets could be fired from within the ship and then out. You know, it's high tech. It's a special purpose built vessel. They were able to get those up close enough to at least reach the fort with their rockets and bombs, but they could get some of their other ships up to actually bombard the fort with cannon, but unfortunately for them, the artillery that was present here on the upper and lower water battery were comparable, and so they were unable to get up close enough with those without being hit themselves. And so really the British were restricted if they didn't want to sustain damage to long-range weapons, and so they had to stay outside the range of the guns of the fort, and the only weapons they had left that could reach the fort were rockets and bombs. So that's why you only have rockets and bombs in the national anthem. You don't have cannons, because they really weren't going to be part of the equation. Although they weren't very effective, the rockets and bombs. They were indirect fire. Oftentimes the bombs would either not explode or explode too soon or too late. And then the rockets against a fort like this aren't very effective.
Yeah.
So you had over 1,000 defenders here, and a mixture of different types of groups. You had the regular Army Corps of Artillery, which is probably the smallest group, which was the garrison here at Fort McHenry. And then they were supplemented by the Baltimore Fencibles, which was a group of business owners and higher class citizens that were part of a militia group that were trained with the artillery here inside the fort. So it was inside the walls of the fort was the regular Army artillery and the Baltimore Fencibles, and they manned the guns up on the walls. There were 20-pounders, 4 on each point. And then outside the fort, you had a mixture of Army infantry, which for the most part stayed behind this wall here in the dry boat and sat it out, because they were only needed if they were going to repel a landing, which did not occur. And you had the Chesapeake Flotilla, you had Sea Fencibles, which were they were working as soldiers with muskets and not on their ships or their boats. And you had some other various militia organizations out here, paid for and funded by either the Army or by the city or the state, and that comprised mostly the defenders here. Majority of the repelling of the British occurred with artillery. I mean, I don't know if there was any musket fire at Battle of Fort McHenry. So that's 1,200, maybe 1,400 soldiers and citizens that supported the effort. That the major had ordered initially the women to leave the fort, because they were women employees, employed by the Army as either washerwomen or seamstresses and necessary vocation. Not all did, and were able to support. And then you have Baltimore City with over 10,000 defenders along the trenches that were dug. So you have artillery supporting entrenched militia and probably some regulars and Marines on the east side of the city of Baltimore. And so that was a formidable defense. And so the British really needed to get one or the other working to be successful. So it was, for the most part, happening at the same time, but there's no indication it was a coordinated attack. Okay, so the bombardment was one phase of it, and that worked great. And then the attack on Baltimore, which ultimately they decided not to do, the approach to Baltimore was the other phase. And so the British came up the peninsula. The Battle of North Point took place, which was a delaying action, and essentially the American forces delaying the British advance. I don't think there was an expectation that they were going to be victorious, the Americans. But they stood toe-to-toe with the British for 90 minutes, and so that's something to be said. That this is an army, the British Army, with a reputation of discipline and pretty serious about war against militia, which are not professional soldiers. And so you have that going on, and then the next day they approached the city and made the decision not not to attack these very well defended positions. They did move around to the right, probing, see if they could get anything, but their commander had been killed early on at North Point, and maybe there was some indecision, and certainly they could hear during all of this the occasional, it's not a continuous bombardment. It may be 10 minutes and then another shell will come over. And then, so that ultimately was, both were ultimately unsuccessful. Unsuccessful here because the fort just couldn't be taken, unsuccessful on the east side of Baltimore because they decided not to attack. The next year, the British found themselves in a similar situation at New Orleans in 1815 with entrenched militia supported by artillery, and they did attack and were just destroyed. And so, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but you know what I mean. It was any loss of life, but it was an unnecessary attack because the treaty had been agreed upon before that battle took place, but they didn't hear about it because no telephones. So you have ultimately a failure on the British side of taking the city, but I think that the citizens of Baltimore were well aware that their city is probably going to be burned. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is where the privateer ships were being built. This is where the British merchant fleet was being preyed upon by ships coming from Baltimore, where they were made, and they would have to have destroyed that industry here to stop that from happening. They weren't going to extort any goods and money. They needed to destroy the industry. I think the citizens knew that and put up at least a more formidable defense, and they've been preparing for a year here. The British made their appearance a year before without all of this defense being built. The fort was here certainly, but not the trenches in the city. And the British just came up and was probing around and then left. And so there was a fear sparked there. And so for the next year, the citizens of Baltimore really came together. Generally speaking, with the army, the regular army would take command of the overall district. In this case, they deferred to a militia general. And it was kind of unusual that it was probably for the betterment of the defenses rather than egos. I think the army saw that the militia, with their connections with all of their their other fellow citizens, probably could make a better organized effort, and so they stood back and let this happen. And so a lot of effort was generated in order to create defense. So you have merchant ship owners, boat owners, sinking their vessels right out here on the Narrows. Just basically, it's the same as burning your own house down for the war effort, and sinking them to block the channel for the most part. They took ship's masts and bolted them end to end across this Narrow, and floated an enormous chain across to deter the British from thinking that they're going to try to slip by at high speed, which would probably not be very high speed because they're most likely rowing at that point, unless the wind is right. And if they get caught up in any of this, there's 30 guns. There's 30 24, 36 pounders. And we're talking point blank range here. And so no ships are going to be able to get by the fort. They would have to either reduce the fort, force it to surrender, and it was going to have to be happening from the water, okay? Because they're not landing troops here easily. So they did try during the night to sneak by with some sailors in smaller vessels at night along this side of the fort. But there were two or three other smaller gun placements upstream.
Fort Babcock and Fort Covington.
And so these are earthworks, or Covington I think was brick, and then the other one was just earthworks in a small. But they had the large guns like they have out here. So they did get by the fort, but then they were spotted by one of the smaller batteries upriver. And then, of course, everybody opened up on them, and that was the end of that. So the fort opened up, and you could see with the flashes of cannon what's out there. And so that was a complete disaster for the British. So they 25 hours of just taking pot shots at the fort, Just didn't really, we had 4 soldiers killed outright. That's it here. Just up in the corner here.
That's amazing.
At this bastion 3, there were 2 Baltimore fencibles killed, a sergeant and an officer, and then 2 others out. Others later died of wounds, and then many injured. But for the most part, the fort was fine. I mean, the magazine, one of these fateful things, the magazine here was struck by a large bomb, but it didn't go off. It was a dud. And then some of this was occurring during storms. And so with a 200-pound bomb, and I think there might be one on a pedestal just on the other side of the magazine, is a 200-pound hollow sphere that has powder in it and a fuse. And so you're a mile and a half out in the channel here as a British gunner, and you have to set that fuse to explode right before it hits the ground over here, a mile and a half away. And it's maybe traveling in 90 seconds, a minute in the air, through rain, possibly. And so if you set the fuse a hair later and it hits the ground and explodes, not going to do much of that damage. If it's too high up and explodes, the chunks are still going to fall, but the energy is just gravity at that point. You want it to get it, 50, 40 feet above the ground or near the ground, have all that energy expended. And these are chunks of iron. I've held one, and if you were to drop one on your foot, you're breaking your foot. I mean, these are still, 10, 15 pound chunks of iron. That would be the shrapnel that explodes. And so that the margin of error is so paper thin. And then from that distance, it's just such a thin margin of error. So they're firing 1,200 of these things over in 25 hours, and not really making much of a dent. I mean, it's just, they needed to get up close, use 36 pounders up against these walls and just blast the fort. But they couldn't get that close without sustaining enormous casualties. So it wasn't going to happen. There's 24 pounders up on the walls, and then those 30 big cannons, which were not initially here, they were gladly provided by the French government. So they supplemented outside on this side, and so there's no way that they were going to get by unless something catastrophic happened. But it just was not in the cards. And so after that, the British continued harassing up and down on the East Coast and up and around the Chesapeake, harassing local coastal towns and plantations and such until the treaty was, in 1815, the treaty was finally agreed upon. And then everything went back to the way it was, 3 years earlier. So there wasn't any gain either way. Although America did get a little bit more respect in the world as a result of this. And the Canadians got more of a social national identity as a result of War 1812. But a lot of the British probably don't even know about it because it's overshadowed by the Napoleonic Wars. This was kind of like a little sideshow. And it's all about the money. It's all about economy and for the British. And it was all about the national respect for the Americans. As a young country, they felt they weren't being respected. And the British were impressing, sometimes impressing American sailors, which the United States did not like at all. In some instances, correctly. I mean, they were British sailors that deserted, and they proclaimed themselves American citizens and thought that they would be safe. And so you had a lot of moving parts. But it wasn't really as clear-cut as you would see the American Revolution or any of the wars beyond that. It was more of a political, and then the combatants are very similar. They're all speaking the same language, the same ideals, and so it's just kind of an interesting piece of history there. They kind of peaked here, I guess, at Fort McHENRY for the most part. It wasn't a huge victory for anybody, but the citizens of Baltimore thought it was. I mean, they were happy that they were able to repel. This is almost 3 weeks after the burning of Washington.
Yes.
And so the battle there, Battle of Bladensburg, you know, so they burned some public buildings. They're not, the government just moved to another place. I mean, it's not that the government was not, it was interrupted, so it wasn't, you know, destroyed in any meaningful way. And that the troops that fled the field were initially supposed to rally at Capitol Hill, which where the Capitol is now, because it's at the Heights, ended up going up to Montgomery Courthouse, and then eventually moving here. And so having them flee Baltimore, or I'm sorry, Washington, I guess it helped bring more troops to the city of Baltimore to supplement the defenses here. So what you see here is what the fort looked like in the Civil War. So we have photos of that.
Civil War, okay.
The American Civil War, the porches and such. And so beyond that,
Just the bottom part was here with that, you said earlier.
Yeah. Beyond that, World War I, this was largely neglected. And the Army came in and set up a hospital here. And when I say hospital, I mean city. The fort, not necessarily itself, maybe some offices. This was a bakery in this building here. This was the bakery office, ovens next door. That's why I said this is the most renovated building. But all of the grounds contain buildings to support General Hospital number 2. So any grass you saw were buildings. And these were those long, thin buildings you see pictures of with beds on either side and a hall down the middle, the wards. But they had everything from auto repair, printing presses, anything that would support a small city, power station, was within the grounds here. And then that ended in the early 20s, and much of it was put back to where it was, as you see here. There were some of these buildings, like where you see windows, may have been a roll-up garage door, you know, so some renovation occurred. And then during World War II, it was a Coast Guard training center, I think, for firefighters. And so I imagine if we ever go into a large conflict, maybe the Army will come back here and take it over again and set up, but probably not now that it's.
I see that you're fixing to have tea, so.
Am I? I don't know.
I think they just washed them and brought them down.
Yeah. So I that was yesterday. So yeah, originally the officers in here would be eating lunch, or you know, or doing paperwork or what have you. And so, as part of the Living History program here at Fort McHENRY, this room is still used for that purpose. It's kind of interesting that not necessarily having the soldiers sleeping in the barracks, but we still have the officers here working in the office, working on the program. So.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you for
This is the.
This.
Who did you say?
There's your cannon he was talking about. Right there. Fired by the British during the bomb. Apartment of the fort. This one didn't go off.